Welcome back, builders and heretics, to Grimhammer. Tonight's story, we're diving into the lore of the massive battle between the four Chaos Gods. Before we get into the madness, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor, other Dark Gods. I want to thank you guys for the support. I've been killing it. Now, let's get to the video.
Vigrid screamed before it died. From high orbit, the world did not resemble a planet so much as a butchered eye staring into the madness of the warp. Its oceans no longer obeyed gravity. Black seas boiled upward in spiraling pillars, vomiting steam, salt, and the pale bones of drowned continents into a sky that burned with auroras of impossible colour. Those lights were not natural phenomena. They were the bruises of reality splitting under divine attention, shimmering bands of warp radiance that hissed across the void and painted the planet in the colours of open wounds. Continents folded in upon themselves. Mountain ranges bent like broken fingers. Cities, once raised by hands that had believed in industry, empire, or perhaps some lesser creed of survival, had become corpse mines and prayer furnaces. Their towers had slumped into pits of molten architecture. Their manufactoria exhaled smoke made from rendered citizens. Their cathedrals, shrines, hablocks, armories, and orbital tether stations had been dragged down into the meat of the world, swallowed and regurgitated as altars. Every light on Vigrid was either fire, soul flame, or the wet glimmer of exposed viscera reflecting the madness overhead. The planet had not been conquered. Conquest implied purpose. Vigrid had been chosen as a board in the great game, and that was infinitely worse. No sane empire could have desired the world now. No general of flesh and blood would have looked upon those collapsing oceans, those plague-swollen valleys, those red horizons choked with brass citadels and crystal towers, and spoken of occupation. No tithe could be gathered from it. No population could be counted. No victory banner would stand long before being gnawed to rags by demon wind. Vigrid existed because hatred required a place to wear shape. It endured because the gods amused themselves by allowing it to endure. The first demons came in a storm that broke the firmament. Along the equatorial war belts, where the skin of the planet had split in a wound girdling the globe, red lightning lashed down from the warp-haunted heavens. Each strike left something behind. Blood letters crawled from the impact craters on hooked limbs, their blades already wet, their horned skulls shaking as they scented foes before their eyes had finished forming. They rose in packs, then in legions, then in endless files of crimson hate, iron-shod feet hammering the world with a rhythm like an execution drum. Their tongues lolled over fangs made for tearing. Their eyes burned with the single perfect hunger of Khorne's creed. Kill, bleed, claim the skull. More came behind them. Fleshhounds burst through seams in the air, their brass collars sparking, their mouths shedding ropes of steaming gore. Skull cannons rolled from thunderheads of clotted blood, their wheels grinding over demons too slow to move aside. Above them, immense winged shapes circled, roaring oaths that struck the planet's surface, hard enough to shatter stone. The blood god's host did not assemble, it erupted, it did not deploy, it charged. Every demon in that red multitude desired to be the first to reach the enemy and the last to stop killing when the enemy was gone. To the west, the dead ground swelled. Mud rose in bubbles. Corpse pools split open. From trenches where no army had ever fought, plague bearers climbed into the light, each one counting misery beneath its breath. Their single eyes blinked with solemn patience. Their distended bellies sagged and tore, spilling black organs that wriggled back into place with obscene loyalty. Around them, Flies gathered in clouds dense enough to turn day into rotten dusk. The air curdled. Stones sweated pus. Rivers slowed, thickened, and began to crawl. The host of Nurgle did not rush. It had no need. Its advance was inevitability given limbs. Every footprint became a fever. Every breath became a contagion. Great bells tolled from nowhere, each note heavy with affection, each reverberation coaxing rust from armor, rot from bone, despair from the places where courage had once lived. Nurglings capered over the shoulders of greater plague things, laughing as they shoved handfuls of filth into the mouths of the dying. What Khorne would take by force, Nurgle would receive in time. Rot never hurried. Rot never doubted. Beyond them, the world sang. It was not music, though the first ears that heard it tried to understand it as such. The sound came from fields of flayed nerves stretched across plains of glass, each strand plucked by the passage of Slaaneish's demons. Demonettes danced there, blades flashing in gestures too graceful for murder and too cruel for art. They moved in spirals through screams, their laughter rising higher as the wounded begged, then keening with delight when begging became worship. Chariots of lacquered bone and polished agony skimmed across the ground, cutting trenches through bodies without slowing. Every impact was made beautiful. Every mutilation was made precise. The Slaaneshi host did not merely kill. It educated flesh in the language of excess. It made pain eloquent. It made terror intimate. It lured warriors into rivalry, then vanity, then obsession. Demons paused mid-slaughter to perfect the angle of a severed hand, to admire the final expression on a split face, to carve patterns into dying meat while the battlefield thundered around them. Their cruelty had discipline only when discipline made the suffering sweeter. And where the horizon should have been, there was no horizon at all. There were towers of crystal growing upside down from the clouds. There were stairways made of blue flame that led into the mouths of screaming birds. There were armies of pink horrors spilling from impossible angles, laughing as they burned, splitting when struck, becoming smaller things that capered through their own ashes. Bolts of witchfire corkscrewed through time, striking targets before being cast. Lords of Change watched from fractured reflections in pools of blood, their many eyes blinking in sequences that made the future stutter. The host of Tzeentch did not advance as armies advanced. It unfolded. It suggested itself. It appeared where it had already been, where it would be, and where its enemies feared it might become. Its demons fought, but fighting was never the whole of it. They misdirected charges. They changed distances between heartbeats. They whispered contradictory victories into the minds of rival champions. Their war was not blade against blade. Their war was meaning against meaning, outcome against possibility, ambition against the fool who believed ambition belonged to him. Above this world, within the warp-shrouded mass of the carrier barge Serpent's Dew, Sire Knight Malrek Varn heard Vigrid screaming through the iron womb of his throne mechanicum. He had not yet been ordered to war. He was already at war. His cockpit was dark, save for the corpse-green glow of rune displays and the ember pulse of old machine anger behind the faceplate of his command sarcophagus. Cables ran into the sockets along his spine. Brass needles drank sweat and blood from his flesh. His hands rested upon the control rests, but his fingers twitched with impulses that were not entirely his own. Around his skull, the throne whispered in the voices of dead nobles, ancestral tyrants, murdered rivals, and things that had never been human, but had learned to wear the cadence of bloodline. Vigrid's cry entered him as pressure behind the eyes. He tasted iron, then ash, then the cooked fat of men he had never killed. Malrek bared his teeth. "Enough," he snarled. The throne did not obey. No true throne obeyed. It bargained, resented, remembered, accused, adored, and poisoned. That was the nature of old war engines, and the knights of House Lucaris did not pretend otherwise. They did not speak to their thrones as servants. They spoke as predators locked in the same cage. The psychic howl rose again. It had crossed the warp like a hook dragged through a wound. Lesser minds had broken beneath it. Astropaths in distant void stations, renegade augurs aboard pirate hulks, witch slaves chained in the holds of warships, all had heard some fragment of Vigrid's invitation. Many died at once. Their skulls split from within. Their eyes blackened and ran down their cheeks in boiling strings. Some survived long enough to claw prophecies into their own chests with broken fingernails, scraping sigils through skin, fat, and rib until their hands became red stumps. Others knelt and screamed until their tongues tore free. The great game had spoken, not in words. Words were for mortals, for treaties, for lies that required grammar. The gods did not need words when appetite would suffice. Malrek's knight stood suspended in the hangar cathedral below him, chained upright in a cradle of black iron and bone. Iron Vow was dark blue and gold beneath its soot, though centuries of war had made both colours crueler than heraldry intended. Serpent sigils coiled across its pauldrons, trophy chains hung from its carapace, each link hammered from armour stripped from dead loyalists. The skulls of imperial officers dangled beneath one knee joint, lacquered and wired with devotional pins. Along the Reaper Chainblade's casing, names had been scratched in High Gothic, Low Gothic, and the private cant of Lucaris vengeance. Some were enemies, some were kin. The engine remembered no difference worth respecting. The hangar around Iron Vow was a chapel to fallen nobility. Banners hung in tatters from gantries, their embroidered oaths stained by smoke and old blood. The serpent of Lucaris coiled upon every surface, fanged and crowned, striking eternally from fields of midnight blue. Rusted heraldry plates were mounted beside severed helms. Oath chains made from loyalist bones rattled in the recycled air. Along the deck, sacristan slaves moved with downcast eyes and flayed backs, their flesh branded with the serpent's sigil. Some had no tongues. Some had no hands beyond the tools riveted to their wrists. All of them knew enough to keep breathing softly in the presence of nobles. Malrek watched them through Iron Vow's dormant external feeds. One slave slipped in oil and fell beneath the knight's left foot. No one helped him. The overseer dragged the man aside by his collar chain, not out of mercy, but because crushed meat could foul sacred mechanisms if left in the wrong place. The slave's face had struck the deck hard enough to break his teeth through his lips. He bled in silence. That silence pleased Malrek more than any hymn. Pain had taught the creature its station. A vox chime sounded within the throne. It was not a request. It was summons. "Attend the strategium," came Baron Kadros Thane's voice, distorted by encryption and machine contempt. "All scions marked for descent, bring your hatred. Leave your hesitation to the corpse god's whelps." Malrek blinked, and the feed shifted. His restraints released with a hiss. The cable crown withdrew from the sockets along his spine, one needle at a time, each extraction bringing a small pulse of pain. He welcomed it. Pain proved he was not yet merely an echo inside the engine. Not yet a ghost to be argued with by some future heir. Not yet one more voice in the throne's crowded darkness. He descended from the cockpit gantry in armor robes stiff with old blood and engine grease. His face was gaunt, his scalp shaven, his skin marked by neural scarring and oath cuts. A serpent tattoo curled from his throat to one cheek, its fangs inked at the corner of his mouth so that every smile seemed venomous. 2 bondsmen fell in behind him. Both were male, both silent, both carrying shock halberds they would never dare raise in his presence. The corridors of Serpent's Dew were narrow for a vessel of such size, built not for comfort, but procession. Every passage reminded lesser men that they moved within a war relic. Pipes sweated. Servo skulls drifted past with censers of bitter incense swinging beneath their jaws. The ship's walls were carved with campaigns, betrayals, massacres, and genealogies of spite. House Lucaris did not forget insult. It cultivated insult until vengeance flowered. At the Strategium, the other nobles had already gathered. Baron Kadros Thane stood before the oracle dais, his war mask hanging from one hand, his bare face lined with age, augmetics, and aristocratic disdain. Sire Knight Odrin Kesh lounged near a pillar of black marble, slender by the standards of throne-bonded warriors, his eyes bright with the restless hunger of a duelist denied applause. Vorgast Rel, broad and scarred, said nothing at all. He rarely did. His silence had the weight of siege guns. The oracle between them had once been a loyal machine spirit housed in a cartographic engine. Now it was a corruption of brass ribs, crystal lenses, wet cables, and bound witch matter. It did not display Vigrid as a globe. It displayed the world as a wound. The image hung above the dais, rotating slowly, bleeding light into the chamber. Land masses pulsed like exposed organs. Warp storms crawled across the projection as maggots of colour. 4 great pressures bore down upon the wound, each distinct, each immense. Red wrath, green decay, violet hunger, blue deceit. The gods had placed their hands upon Vigrid, or their claws, or their teeth. Kadros watched the image with cold contempt. "The lesser augurs are dead," he said. The choir screamed itself hollow. The last surviving witch carved the same phrase into the deck until his fingers came apart. Odrin smiled faintly. And what phrase was worth such devotion? Kadros looked at him. "Come and be witnessed." Vorgast gave a low sound that might have been amusement. "Demon bait." "Glory," Odran corrected. "Both," Malrek said. The oracle shuddered. Across its brass ribs, mouths opened where no mouths had been crafted. They spoke in overlapping voices, some human, some bestial, some so old they seemed to grind language down by using it. Vigrid, the tourney, the champions, blood, excess, rot, change, come armed, come proud, come damned. Kadros stepped closer to the projection. Warp light painted his face in diseased colours. The gods may tear each other's throats. We go to prove that iron kneels to nothing. No one cheered. Lucaris nobles did not bark like hive scum or chant like corpse worshippers. They accepted the words as one accepted a blade placed into the hand. Malrek felt iron vow stirring below decks, its machine soul roused by the promise of descent. Its hunger rose through the remaining phantom link between pilot and engine. It wanted the pressure of ground beneath its talons. It wanted shields flaring under impossible blows. It wanted to stride among gods and make them measure themselves against metal. Malrek closed his eyes. For a heartbeat, he saw Vigrid not from orbit, not through augury, but from within the wound itself. He saw bloodletters crashing into plague-bearers in ranks so vast that the horizon became a meat grinder. Hellblades punched through swollen bellies. Rusted plague swords split crimson skulls. Blood sprayed in sheets, then curdled, then sprouted teeth. demons fell by the million and rose laughing, or screaming, or cursing, or already seeking another throat. Fleshhounds tore through capering horrors, only to burst into clouds of blue fire that became claws, wings, and shrieking faces. Daemonettes danced over carpets of severed limbs, slicing open anything that came close enough to hear their laughter. Plague drones burst under cannon fire and rained diseased organs over hosts that did not know fear, but understood contamination. A bloodthirster descended into the melee like a falling fortress. Its axe carved a canyon through 1,000 bodies. A great unclean one received the blow in its gut and laughed as the blade vanished into rancid depth. Pink horrors swarmed over both of them, setting fire to the wound, the axe, the laughter, and perhaps the moment itself. Somewhere behind that chaos, something with too many eyes watched and adjusted the pattern. Vigrid's surface split wider. The equatorial wound tore open from ocean to ocean, and the planet convulsed as if trying to vomit out its own core. Continents screamed in stone language. Cities slid into the rupture, their towers scraping against one another like teeth in a giant mouth. The first great demonic armies collided fully then, no longer raiding, no longer manifesting, no longer gathering strength, but meeting with the force of divine hatred made material. Millions died in the opening seconds. Their deaths solved nothing. Their deaths fed everything. Malrek opened his eyes, and the strategium smelled of hot metal, witch blood, and the breath of old machines. Kadros turned from the oracle. "To your thrones," the Baron said. "Let the gods learn envy." Malrek bowed his head by the smallest measure allowed between murderers of noble blood. Then he turned away, already hearing Iron Vow calling him from the hangar cathedral below. The war world screamed again through the walls of the ship. This time, Malrek did not command it to silence. This time, he smiled. Brass fell from the heavens. It came down in burning masses through the warp-bled clouds of Vigrid, each citadel trailing red fire and chains of screaming skulls. They did not fall as ruins fall. They descended with purpose, hurled by wrath, their battlements aflame, their murder gates already yawning open before impact. When the first struck the northern edge of the equatorial wound, the continent beneath it cracked. Mountains buckled, rivers leapt from their beds and became steam. The citadel buried itself halfway into the crust, then unfolded like a gauntlet, walls grinding, outward, towers rising, brass teeth locking into the wounded world. From its gates came the host of the blood god. They did not march. They burst forth. Blood letters poured from the citadel in ranks without end. Horned heads low, hell blades lifted, their skin the colour of fresh arterial spray. Each had the same hunger burning behind its eyes. Each knew nothing of fear, doubt, or strategy beyond the purest geometry of slaughter. They came shoulder to shoulder, claw to claw, blade to blade, and their first act upon entering Vigrid was to butcher the demons that had arrived beside them. A blood letter stumbled in the press. Another took its head before it could rise. A pack of fleshhounds tore through a knot of their own kind, not from confusion, but because anything in the path of the charge was an obstacle, and every obstacle deserved dismemberment. Skull cannons rolled forward on wheels that shrieked like flensed prisoners, grinding lesser demons beneath them and belching thunder that spat skulls wreathed in red flame. Behind them, juggernauts trampled the ground flat, brass bodies snorting furnace heat, riders hacking downward at any creature close enough to bleed. Blood ran uphill. It streamed from the ruptured lowlands and crawled toward the brass citadels in thick red veins, refusing gravity because Khorne had no use for laws that did not lead to killing. The rivers climbed skull mounds already growing beneath the banners of the blood god. Bloodthirsters strode among those mounds, vast and winged, their axes chained to wrists thicker than hab towers, their hooves crushing the dead into paste. They butchered lesser demons by the hundreds, by the thousands, before the true enemy had even come within reach. One of the winged lords seized a bloodletter by the spine and lifted it high. "Higher!" it roared, the words striking the ground like artillery. The throne sees nothing beneath a mountain. It broke the demon in two and cast both halves atop the mound. Others followed. The skulls were taken. The bodies were discarded. The mound rose. Khorne's quarter of the battlefield became a nation of impact, iron and boiling red. There was no subtlety in it, no whispered pact, no hidden meaning. Banners snapped in hot winds, horns screamed, chains rattled, axes rose and fell. The host desired contact with the enemy in the same way flame desired air. It needed opposition only so that opposition could be ended. When the red tide surged, the world shook. The first ranks slammed through fields of bone and black glass, their pace accelerating from advance to charge to avalanche. Fleshhounds raced ahead, collars sparking, jaws wide enough to swallow torsos whole. Bloodletters followed in dense formations, blades angled forward, each daemon straining to outpace the next. Skull cannons fired through their own lines, blasting gaps in the host and enemy alike, and those gaps were filled before the smoke cleared. Above them, bloodthirsters roared down from the wounded sky, wings beating hurricanes of gore over the battlefield. They sought worthy skulls. They would accept unworthy ones until greater prey appeared. Far from the brass storm, the ground had drowned. Nurgle's front was not a line. It was a continent-wide bog of swollen bodies and patient corruption. Vigrid's soil had become a soft, breathing thing, dark with fluids and threaded with pale roots that were not roots at all. Limbs protruded from the mire, waving slowly. Faces surfaced and sank. Plague sacks rose from the mud in clusters, pulsing like obscene fruit before splitting open with wet sighs. From each rupture spilled flies, pus, laughter, and demons with rusted blades held in limp but certain hands. Plague-bearers moved through the rot in solemn files, each one counting aloud in a droning monotone, each count ending with a cough, a wet chuckle, or the sound of something tearing inside its belly. Their single eyes stared with mournful patience. Their horns were crusted with old filth. Their swords wept poison. Around their feet, Nurglings tumbled and fought and played in the entrails of things too decayed to name. Great unclean ones rose from the deeper mire like islands deciding to walk. Artillery shells fell into their diseased bulk and disappeared with muffled pops, swallowed by layers of fat, pus, laughter, and immortal resilience. One shell detonated inside a bloated gut, blowing out a curtain of yellow fluid and writhing. Intestine. The demon only patted the wound, smiling with broken teeth as lesser things crawled from the opening. There, it crooned. No need for noise, little brothers. Come closer. Let the ending kiss you. A pack of bloodletters struck the bog at full charge and slowed at once, their clawed feet sinking to the knee. Plague-bearers received them without urgency. Hellblades chopped into swollen necks. Heads rolled into mud and continued counting. Rusted swords answered, opening crimson flesh to black infection. Fleshhounds leapt and landed in pools that had not been there a breath before. Their brass collars corroded, their throats filled with flies. One tried to howl and vomited a rope of living maggots instead. Sweet meat. murmured a plague demon as it pressed both hands into a bloodletter's split chest. Angry thing, hot thing, let us cool you, let us make you kind. The bloodletter bit its face off. The plague-bearer laughed through the wound. Nurgle's army advanced because everything decays toward him eventually. It did not need speed. It had weight. It had time. It had the tenderness of a grave closing over a body. Where the plague host passed, the battlefield lost definition. Brass rusted, crystal clouded, flesh ripened, weapons grew soft in their wielders' grips. Even the air became a medium for surrender, thick with spores that promised relief from struggle. Yet there was no peace in it, only acceptance forced upon unwilling matter. Beyond the rot, the war became beautiful. That was the first cruelty of Slaaneş's host. It made horror shimmer. The ground there had been stripped of skin, not metaphorically. The plains were carpets of flayed nerves, stretched taut between pillars of polished bone, and every footfall drew sound from them. The air rang with music made from agony. Colours moved where no colours should exist. Perfumes rolled across the battlefield, sweet enough to make the mind ache, rich enough to drown the stink of blood and ordure beneath promises of sensation, more profound than survival. Demonettes spun through that perfume slaughter with blade limbs flashing, their movements too precise for frenzy and too ecstatic for discipline. They cut tendons, opened throats, carved faces into expressions of wonder and despair. Chariots raced behind them, wheels edged in razors, riders laughing as they drove through knots of enemies and left behind ribbons of meat arranged in spirals. Slaaneş's host did not break formations by force alone. It unmade the desire for formation. A pack of bloodletters charged into the nerve fields, blades high, roaring murder to the heavens. The first rank died quickly, sliced apart by dancers that moved between heartbeats. The second rank slowed. Their rage curdled into rivalry. Each wanted the perfect kill, the finest skull, the most glorious spray of blood. They should have struck as one. Instead, they shoved and snarled, competing for position, fouling one another's blows. The demonettes laughed and rewarded them with exquisite wounds. One Slaaneshi herald paused amid the carnage, holding a severed head by the horns and studying the angle of its last expression. "No," it whispered, voice soft as silk over a razor. Too much defiance, not enough revelation. It peeled the face free in a single careful motion and pinned it to a blade for later improvement. Against Nurgle's children, the Slaaneshi host moved with revulsion sharpened into artistry. Blades slid into swollen bodies, releasing torrents of bile and flies. Damonettes danced aside from the spray, laughing when a single drop touched their flesh and became a jewel of sensation. Plague-bearers offered rot with open arms. Slaaneshi demons answered by carving them into shapes that turned decay into ornament. Even Nurglings were skewered, stacked, arranged, and made into grotesque garlands before their giggles finished. "Come," a plague demon burbled, reaching with dripping hands. "Come, bright child. The garden has room for every ache." A demon of excess leaned close enough to kiss the rot from its cheek, then drove a blade up beneath its jaw. "Your garden is dull," it purred. "Your suffering lacks ambition." Then came the blue fire. It did not roll across the battlefield. It appeared in fragments, one blaze igniting inside a skull, another burning backward along a shadow, another blooming from the reflection of a blade before. The blade itself existed. Tzeentch's host had no true front. Its towers of crystal had grown across Vigrid in places that had been empty moments before. or would be empty moments later, depending on which eye attempted to judge them. Some towers pierced the clouds. Others hung inverted above the ground, shedding stairs, doors, and laughing mouths. Pink horrors spilled from impossible geometry in shrieking tides, capering as they hurled warp flame that changed what it touched. Bloodletters became statues of salt that screamed until rain dissolved them. Plague-bearers turned inside out and continued counting with their organs. Slaneshi chariots became flocks of bladed birds that flew in circles until they cut themselves apart. When the horrors died, they split, became blue horrors, kept laughing in smaller voices, and cast spiteful flame from clawed hands. When those died, there were brimstone sparks, and still the laughter continued. Above them stalked the Lords of Change. They were not generals in any mortal sense. They were questions wearing feathers and talons. Their staffs drew sigils through the air that made entire charges turn aside for reasons the charging demons believed were their own. Their beaks opened and spoke prophecies that contradicted themselves before becoming true. "The Red Host has won," one said, though Khorne's demons were still leagues away. "The Red Host was never born," answered another from the reflection in a pool of bile. "The Red Host will kneel to a skull it has not yet taken," whispered a third, and a bloodthirster far away faltered for less than a heartbeat, long enough for a cannon shell from no known source to strike its wing. Tzeentch's army seemed weaker when measured in brute force. Its lines bent, its demons fled and returned, its towers shattered and reassembled in new alignments. Its lesser creatures died laughing beneath axes, swords, claws, and plague blades. Yet every death left a mark in the pattern. Every retreat opened ground that another army mistakenly claimed. Every miscast bolt of warp flame redirected an enemy into a worse fate. Omens curdled, directions lied, distance became treacherous. Victory, for any foe facing the changer of ways, became a door with teeth. A bloodthirster led a charge toward a crystal bastion and found the distance stretching with each stride. Its rage grew. Its host followed. The more wrath they poured into the advance, the farther the tower became, until they had crossed half a continent without knowing it and smashed not into Tzeentch's line, but into Nurgle's advancing bog. Elsewhere, Slaneshi riders pursued a retreating flock of horrors, laughing at the cowardice of the prey, until the chase carried them across a killing field already marked by Khorne's cannons. Their deaths were immediate, radiant, and meaningless, except to the plan that had desired them. This was the truth of chaos, written across Vigrid in blood, pus, song, and fire. The gods could hate the same enemy and still betray one another before the first blow fell. They could share a battlefield and never share purpose. Every alliance contained the seed of murder. Every pact was already poisoned. Khorne despised sorcery, yet his rage could be guided by it. Nurgle embraced all endings, yet envied any ending not his own. Slaanesh adored excess, even the excess of rivalry, and would sabotage victory to make defeat more exquisite. Tzeentch needed all of them moving, striving, failing, triumphing, because a game without pieces was no game at all. Vigrid suffered beneath their attention. The world's equator became known in the howling tongues of demons and the broken auguries of dying machines as the Vigrid killing meridian. It was not a line on a map. Maps no longer survived there. It was a wound that circled the planet, a girdle of slaughter so vast that mountains sank beneath bodies and seas clogged with immortal gore. Brass fortresses ground forward, plague bogs swallowed them, nerve fields sang beneath trampling hooves, crystal towers erupted from skull piles, and shattered under axes moments later. The sky rained fire, flies, razored petals, and impossible birds. The four fronts collided there with a force that made the warp lean closer. Billions of lesser demons vanished into combat. Their deaths did not change the shape of the war. They were foam upon a black ocean, sparks from a furnace, screams inside a larger scream. Above, Vigrid, the auroras brightened as if the gods were smiling. The drop vessel was named Crown of Fangs, though no crown had ever rested upon its hull, and no prince of any clean bloodline would have claimed kinship with the things it carried. It fell from the belly of Serpent's Dew in a shroud of black exhaust and witchfire, a cathedral barge wrapped in chains, armor plating, and the old heraldry of House Lucaris. Its prow was carved into the likeness of a striking serpent, jaws wide, fangs bared toward the burning wound of Vigrid below. Void shields shimmered around it in bruised halos, each impact from the planet's deranged atmosphere crawling across them in flashes of red, green, violet, and blue. The craft groaned as it descended. Its machine spirit knew where it was being taken. It hated the world beneath it. It desired to break upon it all the same. Within its drop cathedral, the four knights waited upright in their cradles. They stood like idols raised by a civilization that had mistaken cruelty for divinity. Chains as thick as a mortal's torso held them in place. Servo arms clung to their armor. Incense burners swung beneath their knees, leaking smoke that smelled of burnt oil, powdered marrow, and the copper reek of fresh blood. The deck trembled under their mass. Their reactor hearts pulsed one after another, not in harmony, but in challenge, each engine growling across the vox ghosts, and noospheric static, as if daring the others to show weakness before descent. Malrek Varn sat entombed within Iron Vow, spine pierced by the throne's needles, mind dragged open by the ancient hunger of the throne mechanicum. He was not alone inside his skull. No night pilot ever was. The dead whispered in him. They came as murmurs at first, like nobles speaking behind closed doors in a hall of murdered banners. Then they sharpened. Malrek heard old lords of Lucaris reciting grievances, inheritance wars, betrayals committed under guest right, oaths broken and punished, cousins slain for hesitation, brothers poisoned for cowardice, fathers burned within their engines because age had softened their rage. Their voices clawed around his thoughts, each one demanding that he remember the truth of the house. Mercy was weakness wearing perfume. Obedience without ambition was slavery. Dominion was not sin. Dominion was proof. Strength did not require justification. It justified itself. Malrek breathed through clenched teeth as the throne drank his pain and answered with heat through the sockets in his spine. Iron Vow's senses became his own by degrees. The drop cathedral unfolded around him in layered perception. He saw the four engines through external pict feeds, Auspex ghosts, pressure readings, engine hymns, and the instinctive awareness that came when man and God machine became a single instrument of murder. Iron Vow stood in the foremost cradle, dark blue and gold beneath centuries of soot and blood. Serpent iconography coiled over its shoulder plates and breastwork, fanged heads picked out in tarnished metal. Trophy chains hung from its carapace, clattering against armor scarred by lass fire, melter burns, chain blade gouges, and wounds dealt by things that had never drawn breath. Its Reaper chain blade rested against one locking brace, each tooth blessed with the powdered bones of defeated nobles. Its thermal cannon angled downward, mag locks holding the weapon still despite the engine's desire to raise it toward Vigrid and burn a path through the clouds. Across the deck, Baron Kadros Thane's desecrator engine waited with predatory stillness. Its long barrel weapon pulsed with contained ruin, the dark lance within its casing muttering to itself in the language of caged suns. Kadros named the engine Worm Imperious, and like its master, it possessed the cold arrogance of a duelist who preferred to kill from a distance because distance allowed the victim to understand helplessness before death arrived. Odrin Kesh stood within a rampager called Velvet Wrath, though there was nothing gentle in its shape. Its talons flexed against their restraints, scrape by scrape, filling the cathedral with the sound of knives dragged over coffins. Its chain-blade arm twitched in short spasms. Its thunderstrike gauntlet opened and closed, as though crushing phantom throats. Odrin's laughter bled across a private Vox channel, soft and pleased. Vorgast Rel's despoiler stood bulkier than the others, layered with weapon pods, cannon housings, and butchered heraldry plates taken from engines that had died under his guns. It was called Grave Sentence. The name suited it. It did not move. It did not twitch. It waited with the patience of a siege line watching a starving city eat its last dead. Behind them, almost too vast for the drop cathedral, rose the tyrant-class engine of Sire Dalcor Sen, the eldest of the descending nobles and the most hated by those who still lived long enough to hate him. His engine, Crown Breaker, was a walking fortress of dark metal and old malice, bristling with guns that could erase bastions and split demon engines open from horizon range. Its hull bore more kill marks than many warbands possessed warriors. Imperial Aquilus had been nailed upside down beneath its carapace. Chaos sigils had been scratched over by serpent coils wherever defeated rivals had displeased Lucaris' pride. House Lucaris had bent knee to dark powers when it suited them, but they did not consider themselves livestock. They were not cult wretches howling under another's lash. They were nobles. They chose damnation as other houses chose marriage, war, or succession. That was the lie they loved most. The sacristans moved between the engines in procession. They were robed in black and rust, their faces hidden behind iron masks shaped like serpent skulls. Some walked on human legs. Others dragged themselves on tracked grafts or clicked forward on augmetic limbs. Their bodies were branded with the sigil of House Lucaris, the serpent biting, the serpent crowned, the serpent striking first. They carried bowls of engine oil thick as tar, reliquaries filled with powdered bone, and chalices of blood drawn from failed pilots. Failed pilots were never wasted. A sacristan mounted a scaffold beside Iron Vow and pressed a thumb of red paste against the engine's knee joint. He spoke in a rasping chant, the words half feudal oath, half scrap code corruption. By chain and fang, by throne and wound, by noble blood and conquered bone, wake in wrath and descend in scorn. Another cast powdered bone across Iron Vow's shin plate. The dust clung to old kill marks and fresh anointing oil. Malrek tasted it through the machine's skin. The sensation came as chalk, iron, and accusation. The blood came last. It was poured into the groove of the serpent sigil across Iron Vow's breast. It ran through the carved channel and dripped from the fangs in slow red threads. Somewhere deep in the engine's spirit, a growl answered. Malrek smiled in the dark of his cockpit. "Hungry," he whispered. Iron Vow answered with a tremor through the throne. "Yes." The Vox cracked open, and Baron Kadros spoke across the noble band. "Scions of Lucaris, attend." The drop vessel shuddered as it entered the upper reaches of Vigrid's atmosphere. Warp auroras bled against the shields. Warning runes crawled across Malrek's display. then twisted into serpents and devoured themselves. He clicked them aside. Kadros continued, his voice carrying the cold edge of command. The world below has become arena and altar. The gods have thrown their vermin at one another in numbers fit to drown reason. Now a challenge rises from the wound. Greater demon against greater demon. Champion against champion. The great game pauses to admire itself. Odran laughed again. How generous of eternity to ask our permission to be entertaining. Vorgast's voice came as a low grind. Demon ritual. Demon deceit. All ritual is deceit, Dalcorsen said from within Crownbreaker. His words arrived through layers of age, machine distortion, and contempt. The question is whether the deceit can be conquered. Malrek watched Vigrid grow in his sight. The planet filled every forward pick display. Its equator burned like a saw cut across flesh. Continents drowned in smoke. Red armies moved like arterial floods. Green rot spread in continents of patient filth. Violet radiance shimmered over butchered plains. Blue towers rose where no structure had stood a heartbeat before. He felt the challenge then, not through the Vox, not through augury, through the throne, through the warp, through the deep places where machine, flesh, and damnation overlapped. Come armed, come proud, come witnessed. The words were not words. They were the shape of invitation hammered into the soul. Odran's engine strained against its cradle. They call for champions. Then they have shown wisdom at last, Kydros said. Vorgast gave a sound like stone breaking. Or bait. Bait may still be bitten, Dalcor replied, if one intends to swallow the hook and the hand that holds it. Malrek looked through Iron Vow's eyes at the drop cathedral, at the sacristans retreating to their chained alcoves, at the slaves kneeling with foreheads pressed to the deck as the engines prepared for release. He felt the weight of his house around him, not merely its banners, not merely its engines, its philosophy, dark and simple as a blade in the ribs. Lucaris did not beg the gods for glory. Lucaris took glory and dared the gods to dispute ownership. They had bent worlds. They had murdered kin. They had hunted loyalist knights across ash wastes and fortress moons. They had struck imperial columns before the first prayer could leave a chaplain's mouth. They had struck often enough that survivors learned to fear the second blow more than the first. They had fought beside warbands and against them, accepted boons and cut down the blessed, sworn oaths and broken them the moment strength made treachery profitable. They were not free. No damn thing was free, but pride made a fine mask for chains. Malrek opened the noble band and let his voice enter all four cockpits. Let demons shriek of eternity. We are the fist that gives eternity shape. For a moment, none answered. Then Iron Vow roared. The sound passed through the drop cathedral and was taken up by the other engines, reactor calls and war horns and machine howls merging until the vessel shook with the declaration of House Lucaris. Sacristans clutched railings. Slaves bled from their ears. Somewhere in the lower decks, something mortal screamed and was silenced by the pressure wave. The descent became violence. Vigrid's atmosphere struck the Crown of Fangs like a living enemy. Shields flared, hull plates glowed. The drop vessel plunged through clouds made from steam, ash, flies, and burning souls. Shapes moved within the storm. Winged demons at first appeared as smears on the auspex, then as closing icons, then as bodies slamming into the void shields with talons, axes, claws, and shrieking mouths. Escort craft burned around the descent path. Wardog walkers were released in advance cages, their smaller engines howling as they dropped ahead of the greater knights. Some made it through the first cloud layer. Many did not. Winged demons descended upon them in packs, bloodthirsters, screamers, shrieking things with hooked limbs and impossible mouths. One war dog vanished beneath red wings. Its pilot's last transmission was a snarl of defiance cut short by wet static as the cockpit was ripped open mid-fall. The engine tumbled away, spilling fire and meat into the clouds. Another escort craft took a swarm of demons across its starboard flank. They tore through armor with talons and warp-heated blades, dragging crewmen out into the burning air. Bodies spun past Iron Vow's feeds, armorless and aflame, mouths open in silent curses before the pressure burst them. A pilot still strapped into his command throne was yanked from a broken fuselage by a winged demon and bitten in half, legs kicking once before both halves disappeared into the storm. Crownbreaker fired while still locked in its cradle. The tyrant's weapons thundered through the open drop shutters, filling the atmosphere with lance fire and screaming missiles. Demons became ash, clouds detonated. A winged horror struck by the barrage fell past the vessel in pieces, its severed head still roaring until Velvet Wrath's talons snapped from restraint and caught it through the jaw. "Odrin," Kadros warned. "Reflex," Odrin said. "A noble one. Hold your engine. Tell the engine." The drop vessel lurched. A bloodthirster struck the forward shield, axe raised, wings spread wide across the burning sky. Its eyes were furnaces. Its roar came through every channel at once. Skulls for the skull throne. The shield buckled inward but held. Worm Imperius answered with a dark lance shot that punched through the demon's chest and out through its spine. The bloodthirster fell away, bellowing not in pain, but outrage, and vanished into the red murk beneath. Kadros sounded almost bored. Denied. The release runes ignited. Cradle chains blew apart one after another. Mag locks, disengaged. Restraints withdrew like frightened insects. The floor beneath the engines split open, revealing Vigrid through a roaring rectangle of fire and storm. Gravity took them. Iron Vow fell. For several heartbeats there was no deck, no vessel, no house, no throne, only weight and fire, and the vast wound of the world rushing upward. Malrek felt the fall through every plate of his engine. Heat clawed across the armor. Demons swarmed around him in the open air. He fired the thermal cannon once, cutting a white line through the storm and turning a knot of winged attackers into burning mist. Grave Sentence dropped beside him in silence, guns cycling. Velvet Wrath fell claw first, laughing through Odran's vox. Crownbreaker descended like a fortress thrown by an angry god. The ground rose. Vigrid struck them back. Iron Vow hit first among the four, landing in a plain of black glass and half-melted bone. The impact made a crater wide enough to swallow a hab block. Glass liquefied beneath his feet. Demons caught under the engine's descent vanished as bodies and became red pressure stains, pulped beneath adamantium mass. Iron Vow's knees bent, pistons screaming, then locked. The engine rose from the crater as molten glass ran down its shins. Velvet Wrath landed next, crushing a chariot of Slanesh beneath one foot and smashing its thunderstrike gauntlet into the ground hard enough to burst demons apart in a ring around it. Grave Sentence struck amid a pack of plague bearers, its weight driving them into the soil until only ruptured bellies and twitching limbs remained. Crownbreaker came down last, and its landing was not an impact, but a judgment. The Tyrant-class engine flattened hundreds beneath it, then opened fire before the smoke cleared. Auspex arrays screamed, overloaded, died, and rebooted. Target runes tried to name the enemy and failed. There were too many, too close, too impossible. Malrek did not wait for the machine to understand. Iron Vow's chain blade howled alive. Around the crater, demons surged from every direction, red, green, violet, and blue, each host already trying to kill the others, and now eager to add iron nobility to the slaughter. Malrek stepped forward and crushed 3 bloodletters beneath his left foot before his targeting spirit finished marking them hostile. His thermal cannon roared. His chain blade came down. The first blood of Vigrid steamed across Iron Vow's armor. Within the cockpit, surrounded by ancestor hate and machine hunger, Malrek laughed like a noble greeting honored guests at the gate. "House Lucaris," Kadros voxed, cold and clear through the storm. "Strike first." The 4 knights advanced from the crater of molten glass. Hundreds of demons died beneath their feet before their Auspex arrays could even give them names. The battlefield stopped. It did not fall silent. Silence was a mercy, and Vigrid had been stripped of all mercies before House Lucaris had ever descended through its poisoned sky. The dying still screamed. Rivers of blood still crawled uphill. The plague bog still breathed and belched. The nerve fields still sang beneath the knives of delighted demons. Fires still burned in colours that had no right to exist. Yet the war itself paused, as if some vast taloned hand had closed around the throat of the world and squeezed until even madness remembered how to wait. Malrek felt it through Iron Vow before his Auspex arrays understood it. The pressure changed. The demonic hordes around the crater recoiled not from fear, but from command. Bloodletters snarled and beat their blades against their own skulls, trembling with the need to charge and forbidden from satisfying it. Plague-bearers halted in their counting and looked upward with their single mournful eyes. Slaneshi things froze mid-step, poised on talons and blades, bodies arched in exquisite frustration. Horrors stopped laughing for the span of a breath, which was more terrible than their mirth. The gods were watching, not as men watched, not as kings watched battles from towers or generals watched from strategium hololiths. The gods watched as hunger watched meat. They watched as fire watched a forest. They watched as spite watched a brother's exposed back. Vigrid answered them. The planet began to reshape itself. Mountains tore free of their roots with the sound of continents being butchered. They dragged themselves across the horizon, peaks grinding, through clouds, valleys splitting open to spill avalanches of bone and buried cities. The mountains bent into a vast ring around the killing meridian, each range locking into the next like the teeth of an iron trap. Oceans boiled and rose, not as rain, but as walls of steam and salt and drowned corpses, curling upward to form a pale barrier around the newly born arena. The clouds above flattened into a lid of bruised warp light. The ground beneath the 4 knights convulsed. Corpse fields compacted under invisible force. Bodies from 1,000 battles, demon and mortal and things between, were pressed flat into a floor of meat, armor, bone, and still living faces. Helmets cracked under the pressure. Rib cages burst. Hands emerged from the surface and clawed at nothing before being crushed back into the wet mass. The arena floor glistened. It breathed. Every step taken upon it would be a step upon screaming flesh. Odran Kesh laughed through the noble band, though the sound had a sharpness that betrayed his hunger. "They have made us a court," Vorgast Rel answered in his low grind. "A slaughter pen." "Both," said Baron Kadros Thane. "All courts become slaughter pens when truth is spoken loudly enough." Malrek did not answer. His attention was fixed upon the red quarter of the ring, where the host of Khorne parted. The bloodthirster came forward as a cathedral comes down in an earthquake. It was vast, even among its immortal breed. Its horned head rose above lesser demons like a fortress tower above a hab district. Wings spread from its back, torn and membranous and dripping sheets of gore that struck the arena floor in steaming curtains. Its hide was the red of meat freshly opened to air. Brass plates were hammered into its flesh with spikes the length of men. Chains hung from its shoulders, each link threaded through skulls that still burned with the memory of defeated demon princes. Its axe was black iron and hate, chained to its wrist, the blade broad enough to cleave a bastion gate. It inhaled. The arena shook with the breath. "Who crawls first from the shell of metal?" it roared. The words were not speech so much as impact. They slammed into Iron Vow's hull and made warning runes flicker across Malrek's sight. Blood letters howled approval. Fleshhounds snapped at the air. Skull cannons fired into the sky, their rounds bursting into blossoms of red fire. The bloodthirster pointed its axe at the knights. "Come, metal coward, come and be opened. Come and give your skull to the throne that already owns the end of all battles." Malrek felt Iron Vow's reactor pulse harder. The old engine hated the insult. The throne mechanicum filled his skull with ancestral voices demanding answer, answer, answer. Some urged caution only so they could savor denying it. Others howled for the charge. He opened the Vox. "Iron does not crawl." He took a step. The floor screamed beneath him. Kadros said nothing. Odrin made a pleased sound. Vorgast's engine shifted its guns aside, granting him the arena. Malrek advanced. The bloodthirster came to meet him, each stride crushing demons too slow to clear its path. It swung first. Of course it did. The axe came down like judgment, trailing sparks, blood, and a howl of warp wrath. Malrek angled Iron Vow's ion shield. The blow struck and detonated light across the arena. His world became alarms, heat, and pressure. The shield flared blue-white, buckled, held for half a heartbeat, then spat overload pain through the throne and into his bones. The second blow struck his left pauldron. Adamantium split. Malrek tasted blood as feedback tore across his nerves. Iron Vow reeled. The bloodthirster roared and hammered forward, axe rising and falling, each strike a simple lesson in violence without limit. Malrek answered with the chain blade. The reaper teeth shrieked awake and met the demon's axe in a storm of sparks and shredded warp flame. For a time there was no technique that mortal eyes could have understood. There was only mass, fury, and the stubborn refusal of metal to yield. The bloodthirster hacked deep grooves into Iron Vow's plating. Malrek fired the thermal cannon at close range, burning a trench across the daemon's ribs, but the thing only laughed through the smoke and drove one horn into the knight's chestplate. The impact hurled Malrek against his restraints. Bone cracked somewhere inside him. The throne drank the pain and fed it to Iron Vow as hatred. "Coward!" the bloodthirster snarled, jaws close enough to fill every forward feed with fangs and furnace glow. "You hide in iron." Malrek spat blood into his rebreather. "I am iron." He locked Iron Vow's left arm around the demon's axe haft. The bloodthirster pulled, trying to wrench free. Malrek drove forward instead. Pistons screamed. The knight's wounded chest plating scraped against brass and demon flesh. The reaper chain blade rose, then punched point first into the bloodthirster's torso. The first teeth bit. The demon roared. Malrek pushed harder. The chain blade soared inward, through hide, muscle, black bone, and immortal organs that sprayed burning blood across Iron Vow's armor. The bloodthirster beat at him with its free fist, caving armor, snapping external sensor veins, cracking one side of the cockpit shell. Malrek ignored the damage. The blade chewed deeper. The demon's spine struck the teeth with a sound like a fortress door being ground open. "Skulls," the bloodthirster gurgled. "Skulls for..." Iron Vow's chain blade screamed through the spine. The demon folded backward, wings thrashing, axe falling from its grip. Malrek twisted the weapon and tore it free in a fountain of boiling gore. The bloodthirster crashed to the arena floor, still clawing, still biting, still trying to kill even as its form began to unravel. Malrek placed Iron Vow's foot upon its horned skull. "Take your own." He crushed down until the head burst across the meat floor. Khorne's legions howled. It was not grief. It was outrage sharpened by admiration and hatred, which in the blood god's realm were often the same blade. Before the red roar faded, the violet host began to sing. The second champion entered without disturbing the gore beneath its feet. It was a keeper of secrets, tall and impossible, moving with the grace of a blade drawn slowly from silk. Its shape shifted as it walked, never settling into one truth long enough to be hated cleanly. Horns curved from its elegant skull. Limbs ended in claws and razored hands. Its skin gleamed like pearl over a foundation of raw meat. Every movement suggested both invitation and execution. Its eyes fixed upon Odrin Kesh's Rampager engine, and Velvet Wrath trembled in its cradle of restraint and desire. "Odrin," Malrek voxed. His voice came rough, distorted by damage and blood. "Do not listen." Odrin chuckled. "I intend to hear every word." The keeper bowed to him as if before a noble peer. "At last," it said, its voice entering the vox without permission, sweet enough to rot discipline. "A creature that understands display. Come, little Lord of Blades, let us discover whether your violence possesses taste." Velvet Wrath lunged. The duel began too quickly for human perception. The Rampager crossed the arena in a storm of claw and chainblade. The keeper flowed aside, not retreating, never retreating, simply making the knight's fury appear clumsy by comparison. Its blades kissed armor and left wounds that bled oil, light, and phantom applause. Every sensor feed in Odrin's cockpit began to lie. The arena became a court of cheering nobles. The meat floor became polished marble. The screams became adoration. Odrin saw himself reflected in 1,000 impossible mirrors, not as he was, but as he wished to be. Perfect, feared, celebrated, the greatest scion of Lucaris, the blade by which house and gods alike would measure elegance in murder. The keeper whispered as it cut, "See how they love you, see how they envy you, strike more beautifully, kill more exquisitely, do not merely win, become worthy of being witnessed." Velvet Wrath slowed by a fraction. That was almost enough. The keeper's claw pierced the Rampager's side and tore out a cable bundle that sprayed sparks and dark fluid. Odrin gasped across the noble band, not in fear, in pleasure. The hallucinated applause thundered louder. Dead ancestors praised him. Rivals bowed. Kadros named him heir. Malrek knelt. Vigrid itself adored him. Then the keeper laughed. It was the laughter that saved him. Not because it was ugly, because it was ownership. Odrin had knelt to no master in his own heart, not even when smiling at those stronger than himself. Vanity he could indulge. Worship he could accept. Ownership he could not endure. His voice returned over the vox as a snarl. "You overdress your chains." Velvet Wrath's thunderstrike gauntlet closed around the keeper's torso. The demon smiled even then, until the gauntlet began to squeeze. Armor servos shrieked. The keeper's ribs cracked one by one, each break releasing a note of impossible music. Odrin drove the demon down into the floor, smashing it through layers of meat and bone. It clawed at his arm, shearing plates away, but the rampager pinned it harder. Then the chain blade came down, not with elegance, not with artistry, but with hateful, practical brutality. The Keeper's song became a shriek. Odrin crushed until beauty became pulp. Slanesh's host wailed as if in ecstasy, anguish and envy. Some applauded with severed hands. Some turned on one another in jealous fury. Some began immediately to imitate the kill upon lesser victims, trying to perfect what had been denied them. Then the green bogs split. The third champion did not stride into the arena. It rose. The great unclean. Third champion did not stride into the arena. It rose. One emerged from beneath the meat floor, lifting slabs of compressed bodies on its shoulders as if shrugging off a blanket. It was vast, swollen, and hideously jovial. Its belly split open in a permanent grin of organs, teeth, nurglings, and wet darkness. Antlers of rotted bone crowned its head. One eye was milky, the other wept yellow pus. Bells hung from hooks sunk into its flesh, chiming softly as it moved. Every step released plague gas in rolling clouds that stained the air green and brown. Vorgast Rel moved without waiting for challenge. Grave Sentence advanced, guns lowering, reactor growling. The great unclean one spread its arms. Come then, tired child. Come rest in grandfather's shadow. You have carried iron so long. Let it soften. Let it sag. Let all hard things learn kindness. Vorgast opened fire. The first salvo struck the demon's belly and vanished into the mass. Explosions thudded inside it, making its gut ripple. Nurglings flew from the wounds like obscene shrapnel, giggling as they burned. The great unclean one laughed, a wet, affectionate sound, and dragged a rusted blade from inside its own body. Grave Sentence kept firing as it advanced. Shells tore craters through the daemon's shoulders. Missiles burst against its face, blowing away one cheek and exposing teeth set in black gums. The wounds did not slow it. They widened, smiled, and birthed more filth. Plague gas crawled over the despoiler's armor. Paint blistered. Heraldry peeled. Weapon housings corroded in seconds. One cannon jammed, its barrel swelling with rust like a diseased throat. Vorgast said nothing. That silence became more terrible than any boast. The great unclean one reached him and brought the rusted blade down. Grave Sentence caught the blow on its shoulder. Armor split. Corrosion rushed through the wound, eating into support struts and motive fiber. Vorgast answered by ramming the despoiler's fist into the demon's open belly. His weapon sank to the elbow in rancid depth. The cockpit shook as things inside the demon bit down. Alarms howled. Cockpit seals failed. The plague entered. Malrek heard Vorgast cough once, then again, wetly. Inside Grave Sentence, the air became poison. Black fluid sprayed from a ruptured rebreather line. Vorgast vomited into his mask, choking, then swallowed enough of it to breathe around the rest. His skin blistered beneath his neural plugs. Blood vessels darkened in his eyes. The throne screamed warnings and old ancestral curses. The great unclean one leaned close, smiling through ruined flesh.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
There, brave little brother. No more struggle, no more pride, only warmth, only ending. Vorgast's first words of the duel came as a ruined growl. Denied. He locked Grave Sentence's damaged arm deeper into the demon's belly and vented the reactor. For a heartbeat, there was only white light inside green flesh. Then the great unclean one burst open from within. The explosion tore its torso apart, flinging organs across the arena in burning arcs. Nurglings became cinders, plague gas ignited, bells melted. The demon's laughter continued from every severed organ as pieces of it slapped across the meat floor, but the body collapsed, folding in on itself, its ruined head sinking into its own ruptured gut. Grave Sentence staggered backward, armor blackened, vents glowing, one side of its hull sloughing, molten corruption. Vorgast breathed over the Vox like a corpse refusing permission to die. "Champion slain," he said. No triumph coloured the words. The arena answered. Khorne's host bellowed rage enough to shake the mountain ring. Slaanesh's demons screamed in delight and spite, their songs cracking into knives of sound. Nurgle's children groaned with wounded affection, mourning and laughing at once as they gathered pieces of their fallen champion with reverent hands. Across the killing meridian, demonic armies strained against the pores, their outrage swelling until the air itself began to tear. Only Tzeentch's host remained silent. The crystal towers did not sing. The horrors did not laugh. The Lords of Change watched from reflections in blood, in broken armor, in the cracked lenses of dying Auspex arrays. Their many eyes blinked in patterns no mortal engine could pass. Blue fire guttered low across their ranks, not extinguished, but waiting. Malrek turned iron vow toward the silent quarter of the arena. For the first time since planetfall, the throne mechanicum whispered not hatred, but warning. The silence of Tzeentch's host spread through the arena like frost over an open wound. It did not calm the battlefield. It made the rage around it more obscene. Khorne's legions strained against the invisible leash of divine attention, every bloodletter shuddering with the need to charge, every fleshhound snapping bloody foam from its jaws. Nurgle's children gathered the ruptured pieces of their champion with wet reverence, cooing to organs that still chuckled as they were cradled. Slaanesh's demons keened and trilled, their grief already fermenting into envy, their envy into art, their art into murder. Yet the blue quarter of the arena offered no scream, no song, no laughter, only watching. Malrek turned Iron Vow fully toward the crystal towers. His armor was ruined in a dozen places. The left pauldron hung open like a split jaw. Heat warnings pulsed through the throne. Several external lenses were dead, each feed showing black static, bleeding color, or the image of his own face looking back at him with eyes he did not possess. The Reaper chainblade still dripped the gore of the bloodthirster. Its teeth rotated in hungry, uneven bursts, chewing nothing, remembering meat. Across the noble band, Aldrin Kesh breathed too quickly inside Velvet Wrath. The Rampager's gauntlet was still closed, servos whining as though reluctant to release the memory of the Keeper's crushed body. Vorgast Rel's engine, Grave Sentence, stood half corroded and steaming, plague fluid boiling away from its vents. His voice, when it came, was a rasp through damaged filters and blackened lungs. "Where is the last champion?" Baron Kadros Thane answered from within Worm Imperius. "It delays because it fears form." Dalcor Sen's Tyrant engine shifted its guns toward the silent quarter. Crownbreaker's target lock swept the arena, painting every crystal spire, every blue flame, every still demon in hard red runes. Everything that takes form can be killed. Malrek said nothing. The Throne Mechanicum whispered, not in its usual way, not with the grinding hatred of dead nobles or the bitter counsel of ancestral tyrants. The whispers came sideways, entering his thoughts through memories rather than sound. He saw a banquet hall on Mauder Prime, though he had never eaten there. He saw himself as a boy, though the face was wrong. He saw his own hands placing a serpent ring upon a corpse's finger. He remembered killing a brother he had never had. Then the broken forward lens cleared. A Lord of Change stood reflected in the cracked glass. Malrek's heart struck once, hard. The demon was not in the arena. It was in the reflection, its avian head bent beneath horns of living crystal. Its eyes were suns drowning in ink. Feathers shifted through colours that refused to remain colours, each plume marked by sigils that changed when seen and changed again when remembered. It leaned close from the wrong side of the glass, filling the ruined lens with its impossible smile. Malrek fired. The thermal cannon roared. White heat speared across the arena and struck a crystal tower, vaporizing it in a storm of glass and blue flame. The reflection remained in the shattered lens, unburned, amused. Odrin snarled, "Show yourself." The Lord of Change appeared in the oil dripping from velvet, Wrath's elbow joint, then in the dark blood bubbling from Grave Sentence's cockpit seals, then in the polished skulls hanging beneath Crownbreaker's carapace, then in the void between vox pulses, its face forming from static, its eyes opening in Auspec's ghosts, its feathers ruffling across memories that did not belong to any living man. Weapon locks screamed nonsense. Malrek Blink clicked a targeting rune. The rune split into serpents. The serpents ate one another and became a declaration of confirmed kill. Then the feed revised itself. Target slain, target unborn, target absent, target victorious, target defeated, target located inside pilot, target located before battle, target located after death, target impossible. Kadros cursed. No lock. Crownbreaker fired anyway. Its guns hammered the silent quarter, demolishing 3 crystal towers and turning ranks of horrors into burning vapor. The horrors did not scream. They split into smaller things that applauded with flaming hands. The Lord of Change watched from the reflection in Kadros's war mask, which hung inside his cockpit, where no external pict feed should have seen it. "Baron Kadros Thane," said the demon. Its voice was not a voice. It was many voices nested within one another, each speaking the same words at a different moment. Old, young, mocking, reverent, familiar, alien. It addressed him not by title alone, but by names that had never crossed a mortal tongue. Kadros of the third unspoken oath. Kadros who knelt before the iron cradle and swore to murder his own heir should weakness bloom. Kadros who dreams of a crown made from his father's jaw. The noble band went cold. Kadros answered with a lance shot that punched through empty air. The demon laughed from Vorgast's blood. Vorgast Rel, silent sun, patient gun, gravekeeper, you buried your first fear beneath a fortress wall and called it discipline. You named yourself Stone because flesh disappointed you. Vorgast's breathing became a wet growl. Fight. The Lord of Change turned its beak toward Odrin, though it did so from 3 reflections at once. Odrin Kesh, bright knife, perfumed butcher. You did not defeat excess because you rejected beauty. You defeated it because you desired a higher applause. You wrapped vanity in hatred and believed the cloth changed the corpse. Odrin screamed and drove Velvet Wrath forward. The Rampager charged the empty blue quarter, chain blade howling. As it crossed the arena floor, distance misbehaved. The demon seemed close, then distant, then behind him, then reflected in the fluid splashing beneath his own feet. Odrin swung at nothing and carved a trench through compacted bodies. Faces in the meat floor opened their eyes and laughed with the Lord of Change's voice. Then the demon spoke to Malrek. Malrek Varn. The name entered Iron Vow through the throne, not the Vox. Malrek felt every ancestral ghost fall silent. serpent without egg, son of a murder that never confessed itself, little lord of the Iron Oath. You pretend the throne obeys you because it hungers when you hunger. Malrek's hands tightened on the control rests. Blood leaked from his neural sockets and ran hot down his back. "Come out of the glass," he said. The Lord of Change tilted its head. "Why? You have already come to me." The word struck harder than the bloodthirster's axe. The reflection changed. Malrek saw the duel again. Not as he had lived it, but as the demon wished him to understand it. The bloodthirster's first strike had landed a fraction too high, because a gust of warp wind altered its wing beat. The ion shield had collapsed precisely late enough to preserve Iron Vow's core. The Reaper Chainblade had found the spine because the demon's stance had been drawn open by rage whispered into it before the duel began. Malrek had made every decision. Every choice had been his. That was the cruelty. Nothing was false. Nothing was forced. The path had simply been arranged so that pride would walk it willingly. He saw Odrin's duel. The Keeper of Secrets had cut deeply, beautifully, almost perfectly. Yet a false note had entered its laughter at the ordained instant, just enough insult, just enough ownership to turn Odrin's vanity into wrath. He had chosen hatred. The choice had been real. The moment had been placed before him like a blade left where a murderer would reach. He saw Vorgast's duel. A shell swallowed by the great unclean one had ruptured a plague organ in such a way that the demon leaned forward instead of back. Grave sentences failing seals had poisoned Vorgast enough to numb his pain, but not enough to kill him. The reactor vent had overloaded along a pathway no sacristan had designed. Vorgast had endured. Vorgast had fired. Vorgast had won. Yet the angle of survival bore the Changer's claw. The arena tilted around Malrek. Lucaris had come to prove iron knelt to nothing. They had knelt to the shape of a plan before their engines touched soil. The horror was not that Tzeentch had lied. The horror was that Tzeentch had not needed to. Malrek laughed once, low and bitter, and the sound tasted of old rust. "We were not your servants." "No," said the Lord of Change. "Servants are commanded, tools are placed." The words spread beyond the noble band. The other hosts heard. Khorne's legions understood first, not with reason, but with rage. Their champion's martial defeat had been touched by sorcery. The Bloodthirster had been beaten in open contest, yet the contest had been angled by a hand the Blood God despised. Across the Red Quarter, bloodletters began to howl so fiercely that their own throats split. Fleshhounds tore at their collars. Greater demons beat their wings against the leash of the paws, shaking gore from the sky. A bloodthirster raised its axe and roared toward the silent blue towers. "Witch filth, thief of slaughter, blood owed!" Nurgle's host reacted with a slower, deeper displeasure. Great unclean ones chuckled at first, the wet laughter of old things amused by trickery. Then the laughter soured. To be part of another god's arrangement was tolerable only until the joke no longer belonged to Grandfather. Plague-bearers resumed counting, but the numbers came wrong, each error making them shudder. Nurglings spat and sulked, throwing handfuls of rot toward Tzeentch's demons. "Little clever bird," crooned a plague demon from the bog, affection curdled by offense. "Naughty feathered thing, you spoiled the gift before it ripened." Slanesh's host made the most beautiful sound of pain. It was not anger alone. It was humiliation transformed into song. The Keeper's defeat had become part of another god's performance. Its grace, its temptation, its exquisite woundcraft, all had been used as punctuation in a sentence written by Tzeentch. Demonettes shrieked until the nerve fields answered. Chariots turned in circles, riders cutting themselves for the sensation of insult. Heralds promised revenge in voices sweet enough to make brass weep. The Lord of Change spread its wings in every reflection at once. Then it gave its gift. Blue fire crawled across Iron Vow's heraldry. It began at the serpent's sigil on the breastplate, slipping through the dried blood in the carved grooves. The flames did not burn the metal. They taught it new hungers. The painted serpent shivered, its fangs lengthening, its eyes opening as tiny pits of warp light. Trophy chains rattled though no wind touched them. Kill marks rearranged themselves across the armor, forming patterns Malrek could almost read. Inside the cockpit, the throne mechanicum screamed. Ancestral ghosts writhed as the gift entered them. Dead nobles who had whispered hatred for centuries began speaking prophecy. One voice declared Malrek would die before his next step. Another swore he had already survived it. A third begged him to turn left. A fourth commanded him to turn right. A fifth laughed that direction had become a superstition. The throne filled with futures, each one hooked, each one barbed, each one demanding blood payment for the privilege of being seen. Malrek convulsed against his restraints. His vision split. He saw a bloodletter lunging before it moved. He saw where its blade would strike, where its skull would be, where its death would push the demon behind it. He saw Odrin's rampager burning. He saw Odrin laughing. He saw Odrin dead, alive, kneeling, victorious, screaming. He saw Kadros crowned. He saw Kadros opened from throat to groin by something with feathers. He saw Vorgast rotting inside his cockpit and continuing to fight after his heart had stopped. The gift invaded all of them. Velvet Wrath's claws ignited with violet blue flame that moved against the wind. Grave Sentence's corroded armor plates sealed themselves with crystal scabs that pulsed like eyes. Worm Imperious's targeting runes became too accurate, marking enemies not yet visible, threats not yet born, weaknesses not yet wounded. Crownbreaker's guns rotated without Dalcor's command, tracking futures instead of targets. Kadros snarled over the Vox. For the first time, his voice carried pain. Reject it. The Lord of Change laughed softly. You mistake debt for invitation. Dalcor's ancient voice rumbled from Crownbreaker. Name your price, demon. Already named, already paid, already owed. Malrek tasted a brand burning into his soul. Not on flesh, deeper. A mark written in the place where pride lived, curling around the oath he had believed belonged only to House Lucaris. The serpent within his heraldry twisted. For an instant, it had feathers. The Lord of Change leaned close from the blood on Iron Vow's chainblade. You came to win glory. You leave as proof that glory has always belonged to another. Malrek drove the chainblade into the blood-slick floor, grinding teeth through corpses and faces and bone. I will tear your proof apart. You will try, said the demon. The arena broke. The invisible leash snapped. Khorne's host surged first, an avalanche of red bodies and brass blades. Fury freed and made ecstatic by insult. Nurgle's bog rolled forward like a continent deciding to drown the world. Slanesh's demons came in a shining wave of razors, songs, and wounded pride. Tzeentch's horrors began laughing again, wild and high, as crystal towers folded inward and opened impossible paths that led nowhere safe. The mountain ring cracked. Steam walls collapsed into scalding rain. The meat floor split beneath the weight of resuming war, geysers of blood and blue fire bursting from the seams. The demonic armies descended toward the Lucaris knights from every side, not as companies, not as legions, but as a billion-strong avalanche of hatred, hunger, rot, and spite. Malrek hauled Iron Vow's chain blade free. The first wave came close enough for his Auspex to name them. This time, the names arrived before the demons did. The tourney died without ceremony. No herald declared it ended. No oath was withdrawn. No champion bowed. And no god released the world from witness. The pause simply broke beneath the weight of divine insult, and Vigrid remembered that it had been made to suffer. War returned as an avalanche. Khorne's legions came first, because rage had no patience for order. The red host exploded across the collapsing arena with a sound like every execution in history occurring in the same breath. Bloodletters hurled themselves forward in snarling masses, trampling the wounded, the victorious, the dead, and their own kind beneath clawed feet. Fleshhounds burst from the torn ranks, brass collars sparking, jaws wide, tongues whipping strings of gore across the air. Skull cannons fired into the press without aim beyond hatred, their burning skull rounds smashing through demons of every allegiance and bursting against the armor of House Lucaris in detonations of bone and red flame. Above them, bloodthirsters descended in packs. They came out of the bruised sky like falling bastions, wings hammering storms of blood downward, axes chained to wrists, and hatred chained to purpose. They did not hunt only the knights. They butchered Tzeentchian demons as they came, hacking through clouds of horrors and burning birds, splitting crystal spires in mid-flight, roaring murder oaths at every blue flame that dared flicker near their path. One seized a Lord of Change's lesser herald by the spine, tore it in half, and hurled both pieces at Iron Vow, as if even sorcery's corpse could serve Khorne when thrown hard enough. Malrek Vaughn met the first wave with his thermal cannon. The weapon screamed white heat across the corpse floor, turning ranks of bloodletters into silhouettes, then shadows, then ash smeared through steam. Iron Vow stepped into the ruin it had made, each footfall bursting demons beneath its weight. Bodies popped under adamantium pressure. Horns snapped. Rib cages collapsed. A fleshhound leapt for the knight's knee and vanished beneath the descending heel, its skull grinding open across the meat floor as its collar spat sparks into the blood. The gift of Tzeentch showed Malrek the next strike before it came. A bloodthirster would fall from above. Its axe would bite into his right shoulder joint. The blow would lock the arm and leave the thermal cannon hanging useless. A heartbeat before the future arrived, Malrek twisted Iron Vow aside and fired upward without target lock. The cannon blast struck empty air. Then the bloodthirster entered that emptiness and was cut through the torso by the beam. It fell in two burning halves, each still clawing, each still roaring. One half struck the arena floor and was immediately buried under charging bloodletters. The other crashed against a line of pink horrors, scattering laughing blue fire into the storm. Malrek snarled inside his cockpit. The victory tasted stolen. The targeting instinct had not been his, not wholly. The shot had been placed in his bones before his thoughts reached it. The throne mechanicum hissed with ancestral voices, some exultant, some terrified, some speaking prophecies in tones of courtly accusation. "Left," said one dead lord. "Advance," said another. "Kneel or burn," whispered a third that had never belonged to Lucaris before Vigrid. Malrek slammed his fist against the control rest hard enough to split skin across his knuckles. "I kneel to nothing." Iron Vow answered by driving its chain blade through a pack of plague bearers that had not yet climbed from the muck ahead. The reaper teeth met them as they surfaced, shredding bloated heads, rusted blades, swollen arms, and bellies full of pus. Their fluids sprayed across Iron Vow's shin plates and began eating into the paint. The serpent heraldry blackened, then relit with crawling blue fire. The flames traced the coils, repaired the damage, and left behind scales that blinked like eyes. Nurgle's armies advanced more slowly than Khorne's, and therefore more terribly. The plague mire rolled across the broken arena as though the world had liquefied and decided to hunt. It swallowed corpses without discrimination. Bloodletters sank screaming into rot and rose moments later with flies pouring from their eyes. Tsinchian crystals softened, sagged, and became diseased growths. Slaaneshi nerve fields drowned beneath pus and foaming black water. The mire took armor, bodies, shells, banners, weapons, and terrain. It swallowed meaning. It swallowed distance. It swallowed the distinction between dead and living until everything became part of Grandfather's wet, patient appetite. Grave Sentence fought at Malrek's left, its armor half melted by rot and half sealed by crystal growths that pulsed in time with Vorgast Rel's laboured breathing. The despoiler's guns hammered without pause, stitching the advancing mire with explosions. Each blast hurled diseased bodies into the air. Each body burst apart and rained infection over the ground, helping the bog spread faster. Vorgast knew this. He fired anyway. "Extraction vector," Kaedros voxed. "South by the broken meridian. Move." "South is gone," Odran answered. Velvet wrath carved through a shining pack of Slaaneshi demons as it spoke, its thunderstrike gauntlet crushing 3 into a single shrieking knot of limbs, blades, and perfumed blood. Odran's voice trembled beneath the laughter. "South has become applause." Malrek's cockpit filled with clapping. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere, an elegant thunder of invisible hands. His picked feeds changed for a moment. The demonic field became a victory procession. Brass blood became rose petals. Plague smoke became incense. The burning horizon became a noble gallery filled with shadowed ancestors. They leaned over balconies of bone and gold, faces hidden, voices praising him. "Perfect strike," they whispered. "Finer than Kaedros, greater than Dalcor, worthier than every heir that came before." Malrek saw Iron Vow not as damaged, but magnificent. Wounds became ornament. Burning cables became ceremonial tassels. Gore became lacquer. The demons before him were not enemies. They were witnesses. He had only to kill beautifully enough, and the universe would admit the truth of his supremacy. A bloodletter reached his left ankle before the hallucination broke. Its hellblade bit into exposed cabling. Pain burst up through the throne and into Malrek's leg, as if his own tendons had been cut. The phantom applause rose, demanding response, perfection, elegance. Malrek answered with hatred. Iron Vow lifted its foot and stamped down again, reducing the bloodletter and everything around it to a crater of red paste, smashed horn, and shattered blade. There was nothing elegant in it, nothing worth applause, only contempt made physical. The false gallery cracked and vanished. Odran laughed over the vox, but the sound carried strain. "They want us to perform." "Then be ugly," Malrek said. Velvet wrath lunged into a cluster of Slaaneshi heralds and killed them with blunt force, not bladecraft. The gauntlet came down like a dropped fortress block. Bodies that had been graceful became stains. Odran laughed harder, this time with genuine pleasure. Kaedros's desecrator strode at the center of their formation, worm imperious firing with impossible precision. Its dark lance punched through demons before they stepped from the smoke. It slew a bloodthirster by striking the link of chain between axe and wrist. At the exact instant the greater demon lifted its weapon, sending the axe spinning back into its own throat. It killed a plague beast by burning through the one swollen sac that would collapse the thing inward rather than outward. It fired through a wall of horrors and struck a Slaneshi chariot that none of the knights could yet see. Every shot was perfect. Every shot was hateful. Kadros knew it too. "I do not require sorcery to aim." The Vox answered in the Lord of Change's layered mirth, though no blue demon stood near him. "No, Baron, you require it only to survive." Kadros cut the channel with a curse. Tzeentch's demons did not defend the knights. They opened wounds in the battlefield and called them paths. A tower of crystal folded in upon itself a head of Iron Vow, crushing a pack of flesh hounds and leaving a narrow corridor between the red tide and the green mire. The route existed for perhaps 7 heartbeats. Malrek saw its collapse before it began. If he hesitated, the corridor would close and Iron Vow would be pinned beneath bloodthirsters from above and plague filth from below. Through, he voxed. He did not wait to see whether the others obeyed. Iron Vow charged. Demons died beneath it in quantities that no tally rune could preserve. The Auspex tried to count, failed, began again, failed again, then replaced numbers with warning icons that bred like vermin across Malrek's sight. He fired the thermal cannon until heat bled through the casing. He carved with the chain blade until its teeth clogged, cleared, clogged again, and came away dripping pieces of immortal anatomy. He crushed horrors that split into smaller things that clung to his armor and burned. He shook them loose by shoulder, checking a brass column, and grinding the survivors underfoot. A loyalist engine would have died there. Not nobly, not gloriously. It would have fallen under the accumulation of impossibilities. Its pilot would have trusted doctrine, machine limits, shield integrity, battlefield logic. It would have waited for clean data and died beneath dirty truth. Iron Vow lived because it was spiteful, corrupted, wounded beyond reason, and guided by futures Malrek despised. The corridor spat the knights into a valley of broken god bones and burning fog. Crownbreaker came last. Dalcor Sen's tyrant engine had remained behind by a few strides, using its guns to erase pursuit. It should have been impossible for anything to bring down so immense a war engine in such a short span. Vigrid had become a place where impossibility was simply another appetite. 3 bloodthirsters struck Crownbreaker from above. One landed on the carapace and drove its axe into the missile housing, detonating ammunition in a bloom of fire that tore open the engine's upper armor. Another hit the left arm, wrenching a weapon mount aside in a shriek of tortured metal. The third slammed into the front plating, horn first, burying itself in the tyrant's chest as its wings wrapped around the cockpit block. Dalcor fired at point-blank range. One bloodthirster vanished from the waist up. Another lost a wing and fell, only to keep hacking at the knee joint from the ground. The third clung on, roaring into the cockpit glass while Plaguemire surged around Crownbreaker's feet. Nurgle's children arrived laughing. Plague-bearers climbed the tyrant in patient swarms, rusted blades stabbing into joints, vents, cables, vision slits. Plague drones crashed into its back and burst, washing the armor in corrosive filth. Nurglings poured into the wounds opened by Khorne's axes, giggling as they chewed wires, seals, and the sacred spaces between machine and throne. The enemies murdered one another as they climbed, bloodletters hacking Plague-bearers apart to reach the engine first, Plague-bearers embracing bloodletters and dissolving them into rot. Yet both hosts continued dragging Crownbreaker down through sheer mass and malice. "Dalcor!" Kadros voxed. The word was command and warning together. Crownbreaker's reply came as laughter. Old, ragged, thunderous laughter. They think weight is dominion, Dalcor said. Children, carrion, worms with crowns. The tyrant's reactor readings spiked. Malrek saw the future branch. In one path, they turned back for Dalcor, and all died beneath the converging hosts. In another, they abandoned him and lived long enough to hate themselves for the practicality. In another, Crownbreaker's death created a wall of fire that opened the only route south. In every future where Malrek hesitated, Iron Vow was torn open and his soul was pinned like parchment beneath a blue feather. "Move," Malrek said. Kadros did not answer. Odrin whispered, "Dalcor." Dalcor's laughter became a scream as the Throne Mechanicum burned him into the engine core. It was not fear. It was exultation, an agony, an aristocratic refusal. Crownbreaker's reactor overloaded as the demons breached the cockpit. The noble's body became fuel. His soul flared inside the ancient throne, devoured by machine hunger and warp debt. For an instant, the tyrant stood upright again, every gun firing, every wound vomiting light. It killed everything touching it. Bloodthirsters, plague-bearers, nurglings, fleshhounds, demons without names, all became silhouettes in the glare. Then Crownbreaker died. The explosion tore a hole in the battlefield. It did not cleanse the valley. Nothing cleansed Vigrid, but it burned a path through the host, a brief avenue of molten ground, evaporated rot, and screaming warp steam. Kadros took it first. Odrin followed, Velvet Wrath limping now, one leg actuator sparking. Vorgast moved after them, grave sentence leaving a trail of black fluid and plague smoke. Malrek brought Iron Vow through last, firing backward as the demons poured into the burning gap behind him. He killed enemies before they emerged from the smoke, because the gift told him where they would be. He stepped between collapsing patches of ground, because the gift showed him the bones of the next heartbeat. He avoided a Slaaneshi illusion by choosing the ugliest path through a mound of burst organs and burning filth. He let a Tzinchian firestorm pass over him because the future showed it killing the bloodthirster, descending behind his back. He survived. That was the insult, not to him, to truth. They reached the far ridge as the armies closed behind them, billions pressing into the wound left by Crownbreaker's death. Khorne's host killed its own to reach the knights. Nurgle's mire swallowed Khorne's fallen and turned them into bridges. Slaanesh's demons cut down allies and enemies alike for the perfection of pursuit. Tzinch's horrors capered through the slaughter, laughing whenever a path opened at precisely the right moment for precisely the wrong reason. Malrek looked across the burning miles toward the extraction signal flickering in the poisoned sky. It was distant. It was possible. That was how he knew it was not mercy. Iron Vow limped onward, blue fire crawling through its serpent heraldry, while the throne whispered futures into Malrek's bleeding mind. Escape was possible only because Tzinch wanted witnesses. Vorgast Rel did not reach the extraction valley. Grave Sentence had walked for 3 miles after its pilot stopped answering the Vox. It had staggered through burning fog and fields of trampled demon meat, one leg dragging, guns firing in spasms whenever the throne saw movement. Malrek had watched the despoiler through the shattered edge of Iron Vow's rear-picked feed, watched it lurch like a corpse refusing the grave. Plague smoke vented from its knee joints. Crystal growths pulsed across its ruined shoulder plates. Something inside its cockpit was still breathing, but not in a rhythm any human throat should know. Then the mire had opened beneath it. Nurgle's rot rose in a single patient hand, vast enough to cradle a fortress, soft enough to swallow armor without sound. grave sentence sank to the hip, then to the chest. Its guns fired down into the bog until the barrels burst. Plague bearers climbed its carapace with rusted blades held like harvest tools. Nurglings poured through rents in the armor, laughing, squeezing through vents and fractured seals. Vorgast's voice returned for one final instant, a gargle of blood, bile, and thrown static. Still denying, then the bog closed over him. Malrek did not turn back. Kadros did not order it. Odrin did not laugh. House Lucaris had no right for the unrecovered except contempt sharpened into memory. The 3 surviving knights reached the extraction zone beneath a sky that had become a battlefield of its own. The valley had once been a fault line between mountains. Now it was a grave for gods that had never truly died. Broken bones jutted from the ground in cathedral arcs, too immense for mortal anatomy, too old for any sane geology. Demon engines lay shattered among them, their hulls cracked open, their furnace hearts cold or screaming. Some had been gnawed, some had been split by axes, some had folded in upon themselves, as if embarrassed by defeat. Chains the length of city streets lay half buried in ash and grease. Spilled machine ichor steamed in black pools where flesh tried to grow across metal, and metal tried to grow teeth. Iron Vow limped into the valley first, bleeding heat and warp fire. Its dark blue and gold heraldry was almost lost beneath filth, gore, burns, and fresh mutation. The serpent sigil on its breast no longer lay still. It writhed beneath the armor lacquer, scales lifting and settling as if the painted beast had found breath. Blue flame crawled along its fangs, lighting the trophy chains in twitching flashes. Several of the skulls beneath the knee joint had opened their eye sockets and were whispering in voices Malrek had not given them permission to possess. Worm. Imperious followed, straighter, colder, its long weapon sweeping across the valley with predatory precision. Kadros Thane's engine looked less wounded than changed. Its lance housing had split into layered crystal veins that adjusted themselves without mechanical cause. The serpent coils along its armor had become too intricate, knotting into patterns that made Malrek's eyes ache if he stared too long. It moved with the certainty of something that knew where fire would fall before fire existed. Velvet Wrath came last. Odrin Kesh's Rampager dragged one talon through the ash. Its Thunderstrike gauntlet spasmed open and closed. The engine's headplate had bent during the retreat, not from impact, but inward strain, as if something inside the machine were pushing thoughts into metal. Its Vox grill whispered applause between bursts of static. Its carapace still bore violet stains from Slanesh's attentions, but Zinchian flame had begun to curl through them, blue threading purple, prophecy infecting vanity. Above the valley, the drop barge tried to descend. Crown of Fangs came through the cloud deck, trailing smoke. Void shields flaring under impacts from winged demons and warp lightning. Its prow serpent was cracked. Its hull was scored by claws. Burning debris fell around it in a rain of metal, bodies, and blackened wings. Escort craft spiraled out of the storm and died before touching ground, torn apart by bloodthirsters that hunted in the upper air. One transport burst open above the valley, spilling bondsmen and sacristans into the gale. Their bodies fell burning through green lightning, some still alive long enough to flail before winged demons caught them and tore them apart in the sky. The weather screamed. It was psychic pressure given wind. It struck Iron Vow's armor and slid inside through every damaged seal, every Vox wound, every cracked rune plate. Malrek's cockpit filled with voices, not the old voices of Lucaris, not the familiar dead who hated him, judged him, advised him, and tried to rule him from the throne's black depth. These voices were silk over knives, feathers over graves, laughter behind closed doors. "Left," said one. "Right," said another. "Kneel and live. Refuse and live later. Fire before the target appears. Do not fire. The shell will be needed for the foe behind the foe. A bloodthirster will strike from the cloud shadow in 9 heartbeats. A keeper's herald will speak through Kadros and call it command. Odran is already dead. Odran has not yet chosen to die." Malrek clenched his teeth until one cracked. "Get out of my throne." The answer came in the voice of an ancestor who had died before Malrek's birth, yet the cadence behind it belonged to no human bloodline. "You mistake your cage for property. Iron vows targeting spirits marked threats beyond the valley ridge. Red icons, violet icons, green saturation warnings, blue distortions that refused iconography altogether. The extraction zone was not a sanctuary. It was merely the next killing ground, chosen because it allowed witnesses to believe they had chosen it. Kadros opened the noble band. "Behold what we have become." His voice was calm, too calm. It did not carry the old bitterness of command. It carried wonder. Malrek looked toward Worm Imperius. "You sound grateful." "I sound accurate," Kadros said. "The gift has made us more than we were. Our ancestors clawed for centuries to bind instinct to iron. Now fate itself sits in the saddle. Lucaris has not been used. Lucaris has been elevated." Odran's laugh rasped through Velvet Wrath's damaged vox. "Elevated, chained, decorated. There are many words for being led by the throat." Kadros's lance moved a fraction toward him. "Choose your next words with nobility." Odran did not answer at once. Malrek saw through a broken future what happened before it happened. Odran tearing free his neural plugs, Velvet Wrath screaming through its reactor, Kadros firing, Malrek intervening, the valley drowning. The future forked, split, bled, and hissed. Inside Velvet Wrath, Odran began to rip himself loose. The first plug came free with a wet crack that carried across the noble band. Odran groaned. The second tore skin and nerve from the socket along his spine. His cockpit alarms shrieked. The throne mechanicum, robbed of its bonded flesh by force, retaliated. Pain flooded the channel in bursts of corrupted feedback. Velvet Wrath staggered, talons gouging trenches through ash and bone. "I will not be ridden," Odran snarled. "Not by demon, not by throne, not by dead men wearing my blood." "Odran," Malrek said. The rampager's armor began to move. Not shift, not flex, move. Plates bent outward into screaming mouths. The mouths formed along the thigh guards first, lips of warped metal peeling open around teeth made from rivets and broken chain blade fragments. They screamed without air. The sound made Malrek's vision blur. Weapon barrels along Velvet Wrath's shoulders dilated into eyes, wet and blue, each pupil tracking a different future. Reactor heat spilled from the engine's vents, no longer red or white, but bright Cinchian blue, curling upward in feathers of flame. The serpent heraldry on its breast twisted into a bird-headed thing with fangs. Odran tore another plug free. Blood sprayed across his inner canopy. Malrek saw it through a flash of stolen sight. Odran's face was pale, lips peeled back, eyes wide not with fear, but fury. Neural cables whipped around him like severed veins. The throne's restraints dug into his flesh, trying to hold him, trying to keep the bond intact. He seized one cable in both hands and bit through it, his mouth filled with black conductive fluid and his own blood. "I choose," Odran said. Velvet Wrath's mouths answered in 100 voices. "You chose before choosing." Kadros spoke sharply. "He is compromised. He is Lucaris," Malrek said. "He is becoming property. That was the truth that mattered. Not pity, not brotherhood, not mercy. Mercy had no seat in House Lucaris. A noble could become wounded, damned, cursed, corrupted, even mad, if his madness still served domination. But loss of control was another thing. To be owned openly was humiliation. To be livestock was unforgivable. Malrek brought Iron Vow's chain blade up. Odrin understood. In that final clear instant, before the mutation ate the last of his dignity, he turned velvet wrath toward Malrek. The Rampager's eyes, all of them, fixed upon Iron Vow. Its mouth screamed, its gauntlet rose, its chain-blade arm twitched, ready to strike, eager for one final contest that belonged to Lucaris rather than any god. Malrek opened a direct vox link. You were a noble of Lucaris. Die before you become livestock. Odrin laughed once, cleanly. Strike first, Malrek. Iron Vow fired the thermal cannon into Velvet Wrath's chest at point-blank range. The beam punched through armor, mouths, blue flame, and the mutating heart of the Rampager. Velvet Wrath lurched forward, trying to complete its last attack. Malrek met it with the Reaper chainblade. Teeth screamed against warped plating. The weapon bit deep into the neck assembly, chewing through armor, cables, screaming mouths, and the central spirit cage beneath the head. Blood that was not blood sprayed across Iron Vow's hull. Eyes burst along Velvet Wrath's shoulders, each one releasing a tiny shriek as futures died inside them. The Rampager fell to one knee. Odrin's voice came once more, faint and full of static. Ugly enough! Malrek drove the chain blade down until Velvet Wrath's head and cockpit block split apart. The engine collapsed. Its reactor did not detonate. Instead, blue fire leaked from the wound, coiling upward into the shape of laughing feathers before the wind tore it away. Kadros watched without comment. The valley answered with pursuit. Khorne's champions crested the northern ridge, red shapes against a burning sky. Bloodthirsters landed among the god bones, axes raised, their wings scattering ash and severed limbs. Around their feet surged blood letters in an unbroken tide, blades beating against shields, skulls, and their own flesh. They smelled fallen nobility and came to claim it. From the east, Slanesh's host flowed through the wreckage of demon engines, swift and shimmering, every blade bright, every motion a wound disguised as dance. Their heralds sang Odrin's death back at Malrek in harmonies of mockery and admiration, each note trying to turn regret into obsession, necessity into guilt, command into self-hatred. From the south, the plague mire entered the valley. It came under the bones, through the bones, over the bones. Rot swallowed broken engines and made them sigh. Dead demons softened and rose again as bridges of filth beneath plague-bearer feet. Great unclean ones laughed from the fog beyond sight, their affection heavy as burial soil. The drop barge descended harder, lower, shields sparking. Its landing claws could not find clean ground. Demons clung to the hull. Winged things tore at gun ports. Warp lightning split across its back and rained molten armor into the valley. No clean landing, came the barge master's vox, choked by static. Boarding ramp lowering under fire. Noble engines must move now or be abandoned to glory. Kadros laughed softly. Abandoned to glory. A charming phrase for death. Sentient fire opened ahead of them. It did not protect. It offered. A line of blue flame crawled through the converging armies, igniting demons of every god, burning a single impossible corridor from the knights to the descending ramp. Blood letters charged into it and became ash-shaped like birds. Demonettes leapt over it and landed moments before they had jumped, colliding with their own past bodies in sprays of perfumed meat. Plague-bearers stepped into it, and began counting backward until they dissolved. The path would last only long enough to be used. Malrek hated it. He used it. Iron Vow and Worm. Imperius advanced side by side. Kadros fired with perfect future sight, killing threats before they emerged from smoke. Malrek smashed through those that survived, Chainblade rising and falling, thermal cannon burning holes through living storms. A bloodthirster struck Iron Vow's back and drove him to one knee. Kadros's lance took the demon through the eye before its axe could fall. A Slaaneshi champion landed atop Worm Imperius and carved a praise poem into its armor with bladed fingers. Malrek tore it free and crushed it in Iron Vow's fist until elegance became pulp between metal fingers. The Plague Mire reached their heels. The boarding ramp lowered through fire and demon bodies. Sacristans on the barge's threshold chanted corrupted recovery rites, while hull guns hammered the valley. One sacristan was hooked by a winged demon and pulled into the air, still chanting until his torso separated from his legs. Another kept guiding the knights with signal rods, even after plague gas melted his mask into his face. Iron Vow boarded first, its weight making the ramp scream. Worm Imperius followed, walking backward, firing until the last instant. Bloodletters leapt onto its legs. Plague filth crawled over its ankles. Slaaneshi blades scraped sparks from its armor. Then the mag clamps seized both engines and dragged them inward as the ramp began to rise. Demons tore at the hull. Claws punched through outer plating. Axes rang against adamantium. A fleshhound forced its head through a narrowing gap and snapped at Iron Vow's knee before the ramp crushed its skull flat. Blue fire crawled over the barge doors as they sealed. Crown of Fangs rose through screaming weather, engines howling, shields failing in sheets of light. Below, Vigrid remained open. The valley disappeared beneath red rage, green rot, violet hunger, and blue flame. The dead were not still. The living were not free. The armies closed over the extraction zone and kept killing, because there had been no victory there, only movement. Malrek looked down through a cracked pict feed as the barge climbed. Vigrid's surface writhed beneath them. The killing meridian still burned around the world. Armies beyond number tore one another apart, and every death fed the powers that had demanded it. Crownbreaker was gone. Grave Sentence was buried. Velvet Wrath lay murdered by his hand. Iron Vow lived. Worm Imperius lived. Survival should have tasted like triumph. It tasted like a hook behind the tongue. The Throne Mechanicum whispered with voices that were not his ancestors. Witness, they said. Malrek watched the war shrink beneath cloud and warp fire, and understood at last that the battle had no true ending. They had escaped the battlefield. They had not escaped the game. The void above Vigrid burned with colours that had no place in any sane heaven. Crown of Fangs climbed through the last convulsions of the planet's upper atmosphere with its shields failing in bruised pulses, its hull scarred by talons, axes, warp lightning, and the impact of bodies that had never been alive in any mortal sense. Demons still clung to the outer plates as the drop barge broke from the cloud deck, their claws buried in adamantium, their jaws snapping at gun ports, engine vents, and the cracked serpent prow. Some froze as the void took them. Others did not need breath and kept tearing until point defense guns shredded them into drifting gobbets. Their blood did not behave in vacuum. It crawled across the hull in red, green, violet, and blue veins before burning away under the glare of Vigrid's warp auroras. The surviving knights hung chained inside the recovery cathedral, locked upright in their berths like wounded gods dragged back from a failed apocalypse. Iron Vow bled light. It leaked from damaged armor seams, from the grooves of serpent heraldry, from the cracks punched through its pauldron and breastplate by the bloodthirster's axe. The light was blue, but it was not clean. It moved with thought. It curled and tasted the air. It slid along trophy chains, made old skulls whisper, and gathered around Malrek Varn's cockpit seals in thin feathered flames. The engine's reactor still pulsed with a wounded growl, each beat shaking the berth chains. Its Reaper chain blade hung motionless, teeth clogged with demon tissue that twitched despite hard vacuum exposure, despite fire, despite the murder that had made it meat. Across the cathedral, Worm Imperia stood straighter, colder, almost regal in its restraint. Baron Kadros Thane's desecrator had lost plating, banners, and half its left leg greave, yet the engine seemed less damaged than edited. Crystal veins had grown along its dark lance. The barrel tracked minutely, though no command had been given. Its armor plates rearranged themselves in small movements, serpent coils tightening into new knots, old heraldic lines becoming sigils no Lucaris artificer had painted. Every time the sacristans looked away, the design changed. The third berth was empty. The fourth was empty. Crownbreaker had died beneath red axes and green rot. Grave Sentence had been swallowed by the plague mire. Velvet Wrath had been executed by Iron Vow's hand before Odran Kesh could finish becoming something no noble of Lucaris would name without spitting. 2 engines returned. 2 engines remained behind. The sacristans began their work. They moved in black and rust robes beneath the towering war machines, chanting repair rites in binaric rasp and corrupted feudal litany. Servo arms descended from the ceiling, carrying clamps, cauterizing torches, sanctified saws, rivet drivers, blood siphons, and sensors of bitter smoke. Slaves dragged chains into place, their shoulders splitting under the weight. One fell when a hook tore through his palm. A sacristan kicked him aside without looking and took the chain from his grasp. The first repair torch touched Iron Vow's left knee. The armor screamed, not the shriek of stressed metal, not the protest of overheated plate. A mouth opened in the gouged plating, formed from bent trim and cracked enamel, and howled directly into the sacristan's mask. The man staggered back. His eyes burst behind the lenses. Blood ran from the mask's filters in dark ropes. He did not drop his torch until the mouth in the armor snapped shut and bit through his wrist. The severed hand remained attached to the torch, still burning. Malrek watched through Iron Vow's inner sight. He should have felt satisfaction. The slave had failed. The engine had punished failure. Such things were clean in their cruelty. Instead, he felt the bite, as if the armor's teeth had closed through his own hand. He clenched his fist inside the cockpit, and the dead sacristan's fingers twitched in answer. Another repair team approached the ammunition feed beneath Iron Vow's thermal cannon. The feed whispered before they touched it. The sound came as dry parchment dragged over bone. Load the third shell second. Fire at the enemy not yet born. Spare the leftmost traitor until he speaks. Kill the faithful man before he kneels. The sacristans froze. Their overseer hissed a command and struck one with a shock rod. Work. They obeyed, because obedience was the only armor left to them. When they opened the feed housing, they found the shells within had rearranged themselves into a spiral. Each casing bore a name etched in letters too fine for mortal tools. Some names were known enemies. Some were Lucaris nobles still alive aboard Serpent's Dew. One was Malrek Varn. The overseer closed the housing and marked it for later sanctification. The ammunition feed laughed softly until he fled. At Worm Imperius, the damage was more subtle and therefore worse. Kadros's armor plates shifted beneath the rivet crews, refusing their original alignments. Cables twitched like nerves when cut. They recoiled from blades and wrapped around the wrists of the men attempting to splice them. One cable forced itself into a sacristan's throat, not violently at first, almost gently, sliding past teeth and tongue until the man's back arched and his boots hammered against the deck. When the cable withdrew, the sacristan spoke in Kadros's voice. "House Lucaris rises by the gift." Then he spoke in a voice made of feathers. "House Lucaris bends by the gift." Then he collapsed, choking on blue fire. Kadros opened the noble band from within his cockpit. His voice was strained but proud, sharpened by pain into something like devotion. "Control your engine, Malrek." Malrek laughed once, bitterly. "Control yours. Mine has accepted elevation. Your engine eats men and calls it scripture. All engines eat men. Some are simply honest enough to prophesy while doing so." Malrek looked across the cathedral through a cracked pict lens. He could not see Kadros's face, only the cold shape of Worm Imperius chained upright in its berth, blue light breathing behind crystal veins. The Baron sounded calm. That was the worst of it. Not broken, not humbled, not frightened, convinced. Malrek hated him for that. He hated him because some part of himself understood the temptation. The summons from Serpent's Dew came through a secure channel while the sacristan still bled upon the deck. The signal bore the authority of the House Elders, transmitted from the upper strategium of the carrier vessel through layers of encryption, ritual challenge, and lineage confirmation. Faces appeared in Malrek's damaged display, not as flesh, but as masked heraldic icons. Serpents crowned in iron, fangs bared, coils encircling broken thrones, a council of old men, half of them living, half of them more machine than lord, all of them dangerous because age had not yet taught them restraint. "Report," commanded Elder Sire Vorchan Halvek. Malrek tasted blood and ozone. His mouth was dry. His spine burned where the throne's needles had not withdrawn. He could have lied. Lucaris lied as easily as breathing. But this was not a matter of diplomacy. This was a matter of ownership, and he would not let Tzeentch be the only thing on Vigrid that named truth before using it as a weapon. "We descended into Vigrid's killing meridian," Malrek said. The demonic hosts had formed a tourney within open war. Champions of Khorne, Slanesh, and Nurgle were engaged and slain by engines of this house. The fourth champion did not meet us by blade or claw. It revealed the contest had been arranged by the Changer. The surviving engines bear its mark. There was a pause. On a clean ship, silence might have meant shock. Among Lucaris, it meant knives were being selected in the mind. "You claim victory," another elder said, voice filtered through a respirator that clicked like mandibles. "Yet speak as if confessing defeat." "We killed greater demons," Kadros cut in, forcing his channel across Malrek's. "We walked through the great game and returned. House Lucaris stood before the eyes of the gods and was not broken. Crownbreaker and Grave Sentence bought passage with noble sacrifice. Velvet Wrath fell to contamination and was ended according to doctrine. Iron Vow and Worm Imperius return strengthened. This is not defeat. This is ascension." "Ascension," murmured one of the elders. "Contamination," said another. "Opportunity," said a third. The council began to divide before Malrek had finished breathing. Some saw only glory. They spoke of banners raised over the impossible, of demonic champions slain, of House Lucaris proving its blood before powers that had broken lesser dynasties into cult ash. They wanted feasts of remembrance, war hymns carved into the strategium walls, trophies wrought from the damaged plates of the surviving engines. They wanted to send word to rival houses that Lucaris had walked into a war of gods and returned bearing stolen fire. Others saw the hook. They spoke more quietly. Those voices were colder. They asked whether Iron Vow and Worm Imperius should be quarantined, whether the thrones should be cored and rebuilt, whether the pilots should be removed, vivisected, interrogated, preserved, or executed before the gift spread through the house's engine shrines. They asked whether Tzeentch had marked the machines only, the pilots, the bloodline, the heraldry, or the very ambition of Lucaris. A third faction began scheming before the channel closed. Malrek heard it in the careful way they praised him. He heard it in the way they praised Kadros differently. One elder asked whether the gift could be replicated, another whether it could be transferred, another whether lesser heirs might be bound to the altered ammunition spirits, or whether condemned cousins might be forced into trial thrones until prophecy learned obedience. The dead inside Malrek's throne laughed. The new voices laughed with them. House Lucaris had seen a curse and immediately wondered how it might be weaponized against kin. That, more than anything, proved the house remained itself. Malrek ended the formal report with the words required by rank and survival. House Lucaris struck first. House Lucaris struck often. The field was left in enemy possession because the field was never meant to be possessed. Your interpretation is noted, Elder Vorchen said. Not accepted, not rejected, noted. That meant judgment had become politics. The signal ended. Malrek remained in darkness. The cockpit smelled of burnt nerve plugs, recycled sweat, blood, and the faint perfume of warp fire. His hands shook above the control rests. He made them still through force of will. Iron Vow's reactor rumbled around him like a beast dreaming of battle. The throne pressed against his mind. Old ghosts and new voices waited together, less like rivals now than conspirators who had discovered common appetite. Through the external feed, he saw sacristans carrying bodies from the deck. Some bodies still spoke. Some begged for death in voices not their own. One severed head recited targeting coordinates until a slave crushed it under a boot. The boot split. Blue flames seeped from the soul. Malrek thought of Vigrid beneath them. He thought of the bloodthirster's spine screaming through the chain blade. The keeper's perfect body collapsing into pulp. The great unclean one bursting apart in a storm of burning organs. Odrin laughing as he died. Dalcor burning into his throne. Vorgast sinking into the rot. Kadros calling debt elevation. He thought of the word freedom and despised it. Chaos promised freedom to fools. It promised truth to the bitter, power to the weak, immortality to the terrified, perfection to the vain, vengeance to the wounded, and meaning to those who could not endure emptiness. But beneath, every promise waited hunger, wearing a crown. The gods did not liberate, they consumed in flavors. Khorne devoured through rage and called it honor. Nurgle devoured through surrender and called it love. Slanesh devoured through desire and called it revelation. Tzeentch devoured through ambition and called it destiny. There was no brotherhood in it, save the brotherhood of knives drawn in the dark. There was no truth, save the truth that every soul was meat to something greater. There was no power without ownership. Malrek had known this before Vigrid. Every noble of Lucaris knew it, even if pride forced them to rename the chain. Yet Vigrid had shown the principle without ornament. Chaos devoured itself because it could do nothing else. The gods hated one another, needed one another, fed one another, and spent their worshippers like sparks cast into a furnace for the pleasure of watching light vanish. Below, Vigrid continued to scream. The barge's wounded augurs showed the world in broken fragments as Crown of Fangs rejoined the shadow of Serpent's Dew. The killing meridian still circled the planet like a sore wound through flesh. The temporary arena had collapsed entirely. Mountains once dragged into a ring had been pulled apart by demonic hosts and rebuilt as skull heaps, plague mounds, pleasure palaces of nerve and bone, and crystal labyrinths that existed in several futures at once. Khorne's armies roared for vengeance until the sound cracked plains. Bloodthirsters led charges across fields made from the bodies of their own fallen, using lesser demons as bridges, ammunition, and offerings. They slaughtered Tzeentchian demons wherever they found them, not because it would undo the insult, but because blood was the only language in which outrage could prey. Nurgle's plagues bloomed over the dead. Rot spread across mountains of demon corpses, making them swell, split, and birth new filth. Great unclean ones laughed as their children drowned in blood, as blood became mud, as mud became garden, as garden became grave. Every defeat became compost. Every wound became invitation. Slaaneish's demons turned humiliation into obsession. They rebuilt the crushed beauty of their champion in living sculptures, each attempt more elaborate, more agonized, more furious than the last. They hunted Khorne's killers for the thrill of their wrath, Nurgle's children for the revulsion of their touch, and Tzeentch's servants for the unbearable pleasure of revenge delayed. And through all of it, Tzeentch laughed. Not from one place, from every misstep, every omen, every champion turning left because hatred demanded it and finding a trap waiting with open arms, every victory that bloomed into disaster, every disaster that seeded ambition, every surviving witness carrying a fragment of the plan away from Vigrid, believing survival had been won by strength. The armies built mountains from demon corpses, then tore them down for better killing ground, then built them again. War did not end. War changed costumes. Malrek watched until the feed dimmed. Kadros's voice entered the cockpit on a private channel. "Do you still call this humiliation?" Malrek did not answer at once. His hands settled on the control rests. The throne accepted them like a predator accepting meat between its jaws. The blue fire in Iron Vow's heraldry pulsed once, twice, then steadied. In the cracked inner glass, Malrek saw his own reflection. Behind it, for an instant, feathers moved. "We struck first," he said. "We struck often, and still, something had struck before us." Kadros cut the channel, perhaps in anger, perhaps in thought, perhaps because the same truth had reached him and found no place to sit beneath his pride. Malrek remained alone with Iron Vow, with the dead, with the new voices, and with the wound of Vigrid turning beneath the ship. The world below had not been a battle to be won. It had not been a campaign, a conquest, a crusade, or a proving ground, no matter what house Lucaris would carve into its banners. It had been a wound through which the nature of chaos had looked out and smiled. Cruelty without loyalty, power without freedom, war without end. And somewhere inside the throne mechanicum, something that was not an ancestor whispered that understanding was also a gift.